At some point in your career as a woodworker, either a hobbyist or a professional, you will be asked to speak about woodworking. That request might come from your kid's grade school teacher, a customer who is also the communications director for the local Rotary Club, Lions Club, Moose Lodge, some type of service club, maybe even the Garden Club of Greater, insert your city name here. The Fall Festival coordinator for your city's Parks and Rec department might call and say that she heard from a friend of a friend of a friend that you might be interested in doing a demonstration at the next whatever celebration. I have done several of these, and I'll admit I had a ball. So should you say yes to these things? I definitely think you should, and here's why. My name's Roger Kugler. This is Working at Woodworking Podcast, where I try to encourage amateur woodworkers to share their skills with the community, becoming professional woodworkers, either part-time or full-time. So you've been working in your professional woodworking shop for a little while. You're kind of getting your feet wet. You're starting to figure things out. You're starting to actually make some money. And this call comes in. I think you should answer yes. I would be happy to do that. And here's why. Number one, exposure. You could be talking to 100 people, maybe 1,000 people. Even if you're not talking to them, they're going to see you there. Hopefully you have some type of a sign or a banner, not very expensive, that you could put up that says Joe's Woodworking Cabinet Shop, so that even if people don't come up and talk to you, they see you. This is the same as taking out a great big ad in the local newspaper or getting an ad on the radio station or something like that. This is exposure. Good exposure is always good for business. Number two, this is going to be a great learning opportunity for you. I guarantee someone is going to tell you the way they do something, and you're going to realize that is a much better way of doing that something than the way I have been doing that something. This could be some old codger who's been woodworking longer than you've been breathing air, and you guys are just kind of chewing the sawdust, and he mentions this, you mention that, he mentions this, and it's like, wow, light bulb moment. If you were in your shop making sawdust, you wouldn't have gotten that. I'll also guarantee that someone's going to come up and ask, do you make XYZ? No, I'm not even sure what that is. And then they'll explain it to you. Wow, that could be a great product. That could be worth thousands of dollars. Just this one idea that if you were stuck back in your shop making sawdust and money, you would have missed it. You would not have gotten that. You will learn more about your local market, their needs, their desires, their wants, than the best market research survey that somebody could come up with. Actually talking to other human beings. And now here's the real kicker. Especially if you're just kind of starting out and you're still a little unsure, there might be a little bit of that poser syndrome going on, you're going to realize that you know a heck of a lot about woodworking. A lot more than you thought you knew. And that should be a real confidence boost to you. Reason number 3, you should say yes, creating customers. We live in a very unique time period. Some things are the same, but other things are very different. I'm sure that you realize that there are people out there who think that milk comes from a factory and they put it in a plastic bottle and they go to their grocery store and they buy it. They don't actually realize that that milk comes from a cow. I am not making this up. Now, to be fair, back in the 70s, yeah, there were the same stories that were going around. So broaden their understanding of things. And you might talk to someone that looks down at your charcuterie board and they finally put two and two together and it's like, wow, you can make those out of wood. Ding, 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 ding. You've just opened their mind to all the different possibilities that wood can be used in. And they just might be calling you for a special charcuterie board. Okay, number 4. This is the one I really like. You get an opportunity to teach. And honestly, teaching is just a reward within itself. And if there are children about, bonus points, oh my gosh, you can have so much fun with little kids. Why do you want to pay any attention to little kids? Because little kids have parents. Parents have money. Little kids don't have any money, but their parents do. And if you make a good impression on a little kid, that makes a good impression on the parent. And the next time something breaks or they need something or they've been thinking about this build-in, you're the one they're going to call. So number 5, why you should say yes to an invitation to do a presentation or to speak about woodworking. It gets you out of the shop. It gets you out into the fresh air. You get to talk to people. You can listen to someone else's jokes instead of just your own. So treat yourself. Get out of the shop every now and then. Okay, so you have agreed. You said yes. You're going to give a presentation. Now what? Well, the first thing you need to find out is who will be my audience. Really, really important, because there's really no one-size-fits-all generic, this is woodworking type lecture. You really, really have to adapt to your audience. Now, I mentioned the Rotary Club, the Garden Club, the Moose Lodge, some type of service type organization. A lot of times these are going to be filled with older folks. And that's really good because older folks tend to have money. They have more money than younger folks. Younger folks are just trying to get by. Older folks, they've done pretty well. They actually have some cash, and they just might want a new dining room table. So if you can make a positive impression on someone at one of these service clubs, boom, there's a new customer. Ask the person that's inviting you for topic suggestions. And don't be surprised if you get the question, I don't know, you're the woodworker. Well, then ask them, what questions do you have about woodworking? Now it's a little bit more direct, and they can just answer for themselves. And that might be a way that you can kind of skew your presentation. Still nothing? Go to the default. Furniture. They all have it. They all need it. It's kind of a universal subject whenever it comes to woodworking. Now, there might be an antique dealer in the audience, and I would be bold enough just to ask, after the introductions, because you can use that dealer as part of your presentation. Now, for you 6 other people out there who have enjoyed Roy Underhill's book, Khrushchev's Left Shoe, he goes into great detail and explanation on how you can use your audience as part of your presentation, how to work with the audience. And I have used this, ever since I read that book, and it really does work. Roy kind of puts down his own book because apparently it didn't sell real well. He says that there are 7 copies that were sold. But I would highly recommend that you track that down. It honestly is kind of a hard read, but there's some really good information in there. So you could put together a little presentation about the care and feeding of furniture, or, the most common types of furniture, repairs that are needed and how those are done. Maybe you can get people away from using some of the silicone-based polishes. I doubt it, but you could give it a try. There's just all kinds of different things. That's where that antique dealer may come in, where they're knowledgeable and you can kind of, work with them to develop a good presentation. I think the most important thing is to actually ask questions of the audience. Let them participate. Let them guide you here. I would even consider passing out 3x5 cards, before the presentation begins and just asking people, what questions do you have about woodworking, furniture? Why does my cabinet doors not shut all the way? Just any type of questions. And that builds your presentation right there. An audience will respond much better to a presentation that they are a part of rather than one that they are being lectured to. Don't be afraid to come out from behind a podium and get down right there next to the first row. So should you do a PowerPoint presentation? Well, maybe. You need to find out if there's a projector available and someone who's knowledgeable about how to make the bloody thing operate. You'll probably need to provide a flash drive with your PowerPoint on, and hopefully computer systems compatibility, everything works, there's no technological problems. Yeah, always have a backup on something like this unless it's your own equipment, because there's horror stories. And the big thing is, is a PowerPoint appropriate? If you're lecturing on something that nobody really cares about, then you're just probably providing an opportunity to, for people to take a nap. So I would say be a little careful with PowerPoint presentations. Unless you have studied PowerPoint presentations, you can do a really bad job at them without even trying. One thing I would suggest bringing is examples, samples, things. Maybe put together a little collection of local species of wood. People may know what a maple tree looks like, but do they know what tiger-striped maple looks like? Well, it's a maple. It's simply a variation of typically a hard maple tree, but I'll bet there are people out there who actually think that there are tiger-striped maple trees growing out into the forest. It's not. They're all one species. This is just a grain variation. And you could have little samples that show them that. Take some wild cherry, particularly if you can find some that has mineral streaks in it. That's a great little conversation piece. You might want to bring samples of joinery. Have some that are, of course you have to bring the ubiquitous dovetail joint, but, throw in some mortise and tenon, maybe a bridle joint, lap joint, butt joint, miter joints with a spline. I mean, all kinds of different joints. Biscuits. Biscuits are not a joinery technique. They are used for alignment. You could talk about dominoes and how cool those are and how expensive the machine is that makes them. If you can have things that you can pass around, that goes a long way to engaging the audience. The other thing you could do is simply talk about wood. In your sample pack, throw in a piece of MDF. Throw in some particle board. I have a section of a modern-made cabinet, and it has hardwood rail and style, but the panel is particle board overlaid with the plastic thermal seal. It's not real wood. And you can take this apart and you can show people. Most people do not know that. Most people don't really understand what MDF is. They've heard of particle board, but MDF is not like particle board. And in painted house trim, it's used all the time. They probably don't realize it. Why does my kitchen cabinet shelves sag? Boom, MDF. It's not real wood. And you can talk about that. Know how long your presentation should be. Typically half hour, 45 minutes. Have an exit plan. Know how you're going to wrap everything up. You don't want to be so long-winded, so self-absorbed that the person running the meeting has to kind of come up and push you out from behind a podium. But have an exit strategy. Know when to wrap things up. Not a bad idea to have a stack of business cards that you can hand out to people. So what about a public demonstration? You are going to be set up on the square on a Saturday morning into afternoon. What do you do for this? Because you don't really have a captive audience like you did with the service club. Well, first of all, find out exactly what the hours are, when setup is, and when teardown is. This is going to be very much like doing an art and craft show. More information about that, episode number 25, should you do an art and craft show this year? Might be a little late in the fall to get started with that, but still a possibility. So what do? If you don't get any guidance from the director, whoever asked you, kind of do what you want. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about your business. In fact, the ones I've participated in, they really didn't want to turn it into an advertising opportunity. So if you're a professional cabinet maker, but you're passionate about making wooden pens, writing instruments, do that. Set up some demonstration that you're really interested in, you're passionate about, and you want to show. I did one on restoring antique canoes. I had this great big, 16-foot Old Town canoe that was halfway through a restoration, and I had so much fun doing that. Now, here's a little tip that you would never think about in 100 years, but if you're married and you don't wear your ring because the idea of it getting caught in the table saw just is not your cup of tea, and so you don't wear a ring, when you're out in public doing something like this, I would suggest that you wear a ring. Enough said. Find out what size you have. Do you have a regular booth, typically a 10 by 10, or are you like on the corner of the city block? That will kind of determine, what you can do. Is there electricity there? Do you need electricity? Should you use power tools? I'm going to kind of just maybe say no. Maybe we could make an exception if you're doing turning. The problem with power tools is, number one, they're loud, which could be good because you're attracting people, but it can also be very bad because they're, loud, and you're wearing hearing protection, but no one else is. So, if you're using a router, you might be driving more people away than you're attracting there. And remember, the main purpose that you're there for is to talk. So, don't bring work with you. It might be tempting, but no, don't do that. Have some fun. And here's another little secret. You may be a total power tool guy or gal, but they generally scare people. Hand tools are like magic to people who know nothing about woodworking. Okay, they're magic to people who do know about woodworking. But if you have a good plane, well sharpened, well tuned, and you have a bench set up, and you are just ripping off these long 24-inch shavings that have a beautiful curl, measure about 0.06 of an inch thick, or you can start showing off and get those thousandths of an inch thick gossamer curls off of it. You will mesmerize your crowd. They just don't have, especially if they're a little younger, they just don't have the wherewithal on how that possibly could happen. And you will get so much attention doing that. You'll also get people picking them up and taking them home. Yes, they will steal your wood shavings. Bring a dovetail saw, whip out a couple dovetails. That's always a crowd pleaser. And people are just kind of mesmerized by saws, how saws work. Get some number 2 pine and a nice crosscut saw. Set those up. Let people try it. Give a little lecture on how to use a hand saw. You got to keep everything in line. The hand has to be directly behind the blade. The elbow has to be directly behind the hand. The shoulder has to be directly in line with the elbow. Everything has to work back and forth. Everything moving in one plane. If anything gets out of alignment, the saw catches, it buckles, and you don't make a cut. Bring a coping saw with you. Make or bring your little coping saw bench. The one that elevates the workpiece up near your about the middle of your chest, similar to like a bandsaw, and it has a V-notch in there, and you can put a piece of wood in and start using the coping saw in a vertical fashion, turning the piece as you please. You can make like little animals, little birds or something like that with the coping saw and passing those out to little kids. There we go. There's that hook back into the parents again. Carving tools. Oh, people are fascinated by carving. How can you get that shape using that tool? Let me show you. Boom. It's like, wow, their mind just expands. The universe opens up to them. And veneering? Ooh, now we're getting into the dark magic. Yeah. Set up a little, station where you're doing some sand shading. Oh boy, this is getting really, really deep here. People will be fascinated. Like I said, I did this with a canoe one time. I just had so much fun with that. I talked to so many people. If I remember right, I probably got 1 or 2 boats out of that presentation. And kids. This is more fun than, old people at the Rotary Club, that's fun. But if you're out in the middle of the street or something and there's kids running around and nice, bright, sunny day, you can just have so much fun with the kids. That scroll saw thing, cutting out little animals. Scroll saw is a tool that you can teach little kids to use. They're not going to cut their hands off, and the parents are going to be mesmerized. If you've ever seen a blacksmith do a presentation, they almost all make little steel swans. It takes them like 30 seconds to make these things, and kids may keep those literally for the rest of their life. So if you can make something like this, it could open up an entire world to them. Now, I was listening to a episode of Wood Talk, and Shannon Rogers mentioned they were talking about doing presentations, and it's like, good timing. And he mentioned that he would set up he'd have a board that he'd use a brace and bit and drill some holes in it, like 1/4-inch holes, and he'd have some cut dowels. And he'd have the kids hammer these into the holes. Kids and hammers. It's like better than ice cream. They just go crazy for that. I would suggest not to use nails because nails can become projectiles and that may not be real cool. If you're doing anything with kids, have safety glasses for them. Not that they're going to, shoot their eye out with the coping saw, but it's going to make the parents, a little less skittish. And anytime you do a presentation like this, you need to ask the organizer about liability. If you were doing an arts and crafts show at the same event, they would require you to have insurance, but maybe not for presentation. So just kind of ask the questions, get that out of the way so that there's no misunderstandings, so to speak. Oh, something else that Shannon Rogers mentioned was a spill plane. You might not be familiar with this, but in the days of old, before we had matches, if you wanted to light your candles from the fireplace, you needed a way of transporting that flame. And they would make spills. You've seen them. They're these really, really, really tightly coiled, cone-shaped shavings. You've probably made a few. Anytime that you skew that plane, you'll get, instead of a flat curl, it'll come off at a little bit of like a helix. Well, they actually made a plane specifically to make those things because everybody had them. You had a fireplace, you had candles, you needed spills, and so they made a spill plane. Shannon suggested that you buy one or make one and use that. That's going to go over big. People can pick that up and they can take that home with them. Now, I would also offer to venture into that little understood world of specific gravity. Does wood float, especially with the little kids? Of course, everybody knows that wood floats. Well, you have like a graduated beaker, a cylinder, a little tank, some type of a clear water container, and give them a piece of Ligma Vitae and say, okay, Prove it to me. And they put that in there, and it goes straight to the bottom because its specific gravity is something like 1.23 or something like that. It's a heavy wood. You can look that up at thewooddatabase.com or buy the book. But if you have some ligma vitae there and maybe some balsa, and then throw some pine, some poplar, walnut, cherry, so on and so forth, you can have so much fun. Have a water supply nearby because little kids, water, yeah, they're going to end up wearing some of it. And you'll have to refill the tank, the beaker, whatever. I have a real tall graduated cylinder type thing that I can use for demonstrations like this. You know, literally to these kids' parents, you've taught them like science. I mean, you raised to superhero status. You will be known as the Wood Man, which is fine. Have some business cards handy. Pass that out to the parents. Anytime you need something, boom, you just created a customer. Okay, what about your local woodworking club? Yikes! Take some deep breaths, calm down, and say yes. Yeah, it can kind of, for odd reasons, a little unnerving to actually talk to a group of other woodworkers about woodworking. Yeah, it's a little weird. Yeah, get over yourself. You can have a lot of fun with these folks because these folks actually know something about woodworking and you're just not, going from ground zero. Usually there's some type of a theme that you'll be asked to talk about. It could be your business, how your shop is set up, what type of finishes you use, what type of tools. They're very, very curious because most of these people, in fact, like 99.9% of these people are amateur woodworkers. They do it because it's fun. They're one of the fortunate people that actually has a hobby. But there's also this intrigue, this curiosity on how do the pros do it. And so, again, let them pick your brain. And remember, there's probably some people in there, the ones that with the gray hair, they could have been doing this a lot longer than you have. And those are the folks you need to learn from. Because they may not do this professionally, but oh my gosh, they do some extraordinary work. Oh, I wish I had a hobby that I could do something like that in. And at the same time, don't assume that all of them are very experienced woodworkers, because they're not. Some people are just starting out. This could be literally their first meeting at this woodworking club. So you don't talk over, don't talk under, just talk and be honest and truthful. And you will do absolutely fine and have a wonderful time while you're at it. Okay, recommendations for this show. Wood Talk episode number 536 on your favorite podcast player. I've been listening to Mark, Matt, and Shannon for, I think they've been on for like a decade or so. 538 or 536 episodes. That's a long time. Once a week, that's over 10 years. Roy Underhill's book, Khrushchev's Left Shoe, might be hard to find. I think that should be in everyone's Roy Underhill collection. Missed jobs for the week, kitchen cabinets. New construction, need it like in 3 months, just trying to find someone to build these things. And they were not having any luck. I couldn't help them. I might actually do a podcast on kitchen cabinets. It can be an incredibly lucrative and rewarding job. So I would like to thank our listeners in Roseburg, Oregon and Helsinki, Finland. Greatly appreciate it. Roseburg, Oregon. I believe that is where Scott with Essential Craftsman YouTube channel lives. Yeah, I'll put a link into Essential Craftsman on YouTube. Absolutely fantastic channel. Those guys are doing just incredible work, both on the YouTube side, and they also have a podcast that's very, very good. So I need to ask a favor of you. I need questions. I need subject ideas. I know that many of you have emailed or called asking that I interview other professional woodworkers, I think that's a fantastic idea. I have to kind of get my technology wires in the same basket, so to speak, and figure out how I can do that. Working on it. But I'd love to have other suggestions or questions that I could work with. As always, coaching has really picked up. I would be more than happy to sit down with you and spend an hour or so discussing your business and how to make improvements and maybe some stumbling blocks that you might actually not be seeing very clearly. And of course, if anybody would like to support the show, you can always buy me a cup of coffee or make a donation directly on the website. So until next week, happy woodworking.